morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Hi there. How are you?
Hi, Carla. Oh, nice. Hi. Okay, I was having a few technical difficulties, but looks like we have folks. So I'm going to get started. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. This is the 10th convening of our illustrious Future of Work Commission. And under these unusual circumstances, we're actually going to jump right in today. Let me just see. I got a message from James, but Mary Kay, are you here yet?
No, we don't have Mary Kay or James yet.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, you know what? Maybe what I will do is just start us off with a few of the process pieces that Mary Kay and James were also going to cover, but just to remind everybody that we have one more convening after this. That one is going to be on November 9th, so just in a few weeks, also from 10 to 1 by Zoom. And at that one, we are really just going to be doing our final, sign off on the recommendations of the commission as a whole, which means that today's meeting is going to be devoted completely to talking through and getting alignment on the 5 areas that we have. I just want to acknowledge all of our co-leads who have been absolutely phenomenal, working before the last meeting and between these meetings to really flesh out the what of what those recommendations are and a little bit of the how. What we've also identified is that by focusing on those areas, there may be some that are gaps, some may be cross-cutting issues that affect multiple priority areas. And so we are going to save some time for conversation at the end of this meeting to make sure that we at least surface those cross-cutting issues. We may not have an answer for all of them, but in some way, at the very least, our report could acknowledge, right, that there are these cross-cutting issues that also need to be addressed. The other thing that we wanted to make sure is in the report, I think we've raised it, but I just want to elevate it one more time, is some acknowledgement of the importance of federal policy and federal programs. You might all remember that our very first convening, we talked about kind of cabining off federal issues, immigration reform, for example, right, as something separate from the commission's work. I think now, given a whole bunch of events, but including the timing of our final report, which will be in December, after an extraordinarily significant election, but also given the evolution of the I don't know how to shorthand this, but what has happened in our economy, what has happened in our world, the public health crisis, the overall recession, that it makes sense for us to talk about the importance of federal policy, federal investments, and how that affects what we do here. And so, looking at California, both from the perspective of retaining our competitiveness when we propose certain things, but also how California is leading the way in terms of things that we try here that could become national policy. And I know, given who you all are, the perspectives that you bring, that already the recommendations will have that perspective. But we thought that the report should also have an explicit acknowledgement and recognition of the importance of federal policy, even though we won't specifically be making federal recommendations. So, so today is really, we're going to jump right into letting the co-leads take us through their thinking, their revisions, their hard work. Again, just so appreciate what they've done. And just a reminder to the commission, right? From the very beginning, our charge was 1, to be bold, Two, to come up with things that would not just be a report that is great to read and even inspiring to read, but actually have actionable things that can be done, that the governor can embrace, that all sectors of our society could embrace to push forward. And three, to come up with something that we all stand by, something unified, that every single one of you as the governor's appointees could say, yes, this is a set of recommendations that I can be proud of. It doesn't mean that every single one of them is going to be you're going to champion every one of them, or you're going to take it and run with every single one, but it does mean that we wanted one unified report that comes out of the commission as a whole. So, so are there any questions before we start? We can come back to this again at the end, because maybe the questions will surface through the course of discussion today too. So if that sounds good, I think I'm going to have us. I'm not sure if I'm seeing everybody, Anmol, because of the because of what's on the screen already. But let me just look to Lande. I see you. Is there anything, Lande, that you want to add?
No, I think I'm good. I think that is good. I think we are. I guess the only thing I would say, in addition to good morning to everyone, and it's nice to see you, is that as we get into these discussions today, I think the true north that we're really thinking about is like making sure that we're super clear about the what. I think that we have had a lot of conversations over the last several weeks and months about the how, and we want to start to develop those ideas. But I think in terms of the governor and the administration, and my dog, we are all jointly committed to really making sure that we're clear about the what first, because there could be any number of strategies to get us to the how. So that's the only thing I would add.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so hold on. Is Saru on? Amal, do we see Saru?
She's having a problem with the link, but I just resent it. Oh, there she is. Yep.
She got into, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So let's then jump in again, in the interest of having enough time for as full as we can. I feel like these things are always, there's such amazing work that goes on throughout the life of the commission. And at the end, it feels like there's not enough time. So to try to give us as much time as we can, let's jump into the first priority. And I'm going to have Maria and Tom talk about ensuring that there are jobs for everyone who wants to work. And I think everybody hopefully got the documents, updated documents. So that's priority area 1A, that document, if folks want to follow along with that. Tom and Maria, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Tom, you want to go ahead and start on this one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a couple of ideas. So Maria and I are going to do a little bit of a tag team. So one idea was, are there areas where the state can create a huge number of jobs without spending a lot of money, since right now the state is having to make very difficult budgetary decisions. One example of this is clean energy jobs, where analysis by a group called Rewiring America, which is led by Saul Griffith, who's a Californian based in San Francisco. He's a MacArthur Genius Award winner and the CEO of Other Lab, has identified a set of policies that could dramatically accelerate the development of those clean energy technologies that are mature. And those are things like utility scale wind and solar, residential solar, electric appliances, and EV batteries and electric vehicles. And one of the main things standing in the way of having this happen is for soft costs, that is the cost of installation and permitting, to get down to the levels that we see in Australia and Germany. So this would require state and local collaboration, because this is traditionally an issue that has been in the jurisdictions of local governments. So that's one thing that we wanted to flag. But I think in general, that model of, are there areas where we can remove barriers to private sector investment, have that result in investment and achieving a policy goal that the governor has, in this case, the transition to a carbon neutral economy, and something that can create lots of jobs. So that was the first idea that we wanted to talk about. The second is promoting entrepreneurship and taking advantage of California's world-class universities. And here the goal would be to double the number of undergraduates in both 2- and 4-year colleges who are prepared not only to get a job, but to create jobs. And this is an area where I think the governor could do a fair amount just by mobilizing the private sector, philanthropists and foundations, the private sector investment community, to support these types of entrepreneurship programs, which have already been prototyped, particularly in the UCs and some of the private research universities, with support from the National Science Foundation, and a program developed by another Californian, Steve Blank, who's a successful serial entrepreneur. So this is the idea of the lean startup methodology, which notes that there's a lot of similarity between the entrepreneurial process and the scientific method, which is you may have a hypothesis about who your customers are and whether you developed a product or service that people want to buy. But the only way that you find out whether your hypotheses are correct is by going out and interacting with customers and partners. So the idea would be to take programs like that, to scale them up, to ensure that there was a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of participation of women, underrepresented minorities, and first generation college goers, to expand this from the UCs and the private research universities to other institutions of higher education, and to think not only about experiential education, but mentorship and financing. And a question I have here is whether there is a role for CalPERS and CalSTRS, obviously not directly investing in individual startups, but perhaps operating through a fund-to-fund mechanism. So that's something that UCLP has begun to look at, is the role that they can play in supporting university-based startups. I think this is absolutely critical because economists who have studied job creation have noticed that it's not necessarily small firms that create the majority of the jobs. It's the firms that start off small and get big. So we need to be encouraging economic dynamism and startups that have the potential to scale up. So obviously, dry cleaners and restaurants play a really important role in the community, but in terms of net job creation, it's these high growth firms that are responsible for a lot of the net job creation. So those are the two ideas that I wanted to put on the table. There's clearly some interaction between our first idea around clean energy and the proposal number 5, which is about future-proofing California. And I think there's some opportunities to think about how California might use Recovery Act funds in the context of job creation, but maybe we can talk about those later. So Maria, over to you to talk about some additional ideas.
Yes, so to take that last idea about entrepreneurship and take it further, I mean, we really heard all of you, bring forward so many exciting ideas around entrepreneurship. I think we all recognize that that is where the growth is, and the way Tom laid it out, the high growth firms. So how does a firm grow? How does a startup grow? And one of the concepts that we put in the paper was around the procurement and the purchasing, because certainly that's tied into growth that a firm could experience that then results in the job. So there's been a lot of conversation in multiple committee meetings that I participate in, and I just sense that there's a real interest among state leadership to look at how larger organizations can invest in those entrepreneurs and business owners through their purchasing power. So again, to take entrepreneurship one step further, and what could we ask of business? What could we ask you know, the governor. It's, you know, to ensure that we're partnering with some of the largest organizations that are spending, but maybe they direct that spend to those smaller startup businesses, so that that job creation is created here in the state. So that is built into, or that was highlighted in one of the proposals that that we put forward here. I think the other thing that I wanted to make sure that I brought forward, because it was also something that was discussed last time, was the role of social entrepreneurs. And I had very good conversation with Carla, who you all know this is her passion area. And through a lot of the work that we even did prior to pandemic, of reaching out and speaking to some of the entrepreneurs in terms of what they're doing and how they're engaging with those that are really outside of the mainstream of the job market. So I'm asked Carla if she wouldn't mind saying a few words about that, but that write-up is in your materials as well. So if you don't mind, Julie, I'm gonna go to a third participant here. Thank you. I got thumbs up. Go ahead, Carla.
Okay. Just, yeah, I mean, really briefly, I would just say, you know, I've said it before, there's a tier of companies where entrepreneurship and workforce development come together because they're providing jobs to people who really need them. Let's remember there are 8 million people, I think, in California with a criminal record, really hard time getting jobs, and we need companies that are willing to employ them, provide the kind of support they need so they can move on into competitive employment. And making an investment in those kinds of companies as part of what we do to lift up entrepreneurship and the small business community, I think makes sense. Employment social enterprises were named for the very first time in federal policy in the Jobs for Economic Recovery Act. And there's a coalition that's been, you know, advocating for that. So I think California could do something similar. So it's really just making sure we integrate this particular kind of business when we're talking about entrepreneurship and small business investment.
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about entrepreneurship, there's a couple of different angles, you know, the commitments through higher ed, like what Tom mentioned, you know, a potential procurement strategy, incorporating some of the themes that Carla just mentioned. And it could be something we synthesize a little further, but all those elements I think are key to job creation and the expansion of jobs. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure Tom is as well.
Perfect. Let's open it up. Thank you, Maria and Tom. And again, because we want to get through all 5 of the priority areas, I'm going to do like I did last time and really push us forward from each one. So let's spend a few minutes on questions, concerns. Maria and Tom, I wanted to make sure that you're looking in the chat too, that Roy had a comment. He loves this, but also has a question about why focusing on universities when there are high school lean startup programs like the Latino School in Fresno too. So I'm just gonna throw that out there, but also just throw it open. Let's open it up for a few comments before we hear back from our co-leads.
How do you want to do that, Julie?
Go ahead, Governor. Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly on this elimination of soft costs, Tom, that you were raising. And I love the fact, let me just say, I love the fact that you've got 1 million jobs. I love the fact that you've got double the numbers. So you've got concrete measurements that you are using, which I hope we've got for all of these. But in terms of the soft cost, my question is how do you propose, you know, I'm a big believer in competitions. How do you propose incentivizing the locals to give up control to reduce those soft costs?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we'd have to have a blank sheet of paper approach to say, how do we want to do the permitting and installation, all the other things that are drivers of soft costs to begin with, and then to see if we could find you know, one or more cities, maybe with you as you suggest, with some sort of competition that is willing to embrace these. You know, what I think is sort of trickier is you know, once you've done that, would a voluntary approach be sufficient to get enough compliance with this for it to be worthwhile? So, you know, Germany and Australia have done it. And I guess the question is it impossible for us to imagine the United States being able to pull this off as well? So I didn't have a section in there about how the governor needs to preempt all the mayors, but we could have a discussion about that.
Yeah, and Governor, while I'm looking to see if other people have other comments, I really appreciate what you said about the concrete nature of the proposals. All the colleagues did some really great work on that. And I think there's also what we were looking for was some level of consistency in terms of a level of detail about that. And I hope that we've achieved that, but that's something else for everyone to look for. Doug, please.
Yes, thank you. So I love the idea of leveraging public and private investments to create good jobs and further our climate change goals. And I have a question about one of the bullet points that refers to a family supporting wage. And I just want to flag that in the fossil fuel related industries in California, many of those jobs are governed by prevailing wages. So in the refineries here, in terms of wages and benefits for blue collar workers, those are great jobs. Helping the climate, not so great jobs. So my question is, how do we make sure that in these new and emerging industries, we have things like prevailing wages so that we can actually guarantee that we're creating good jobs here?
Well, I think one of the things we can do is to say, what have jobs in this sector been paying, right? So that's one thing. So for example, if we have a sense for what are the wages paid by manufacturing of electric appliances or installation of electric appliances, that's data that we have.
So that's similar, and obviously our labor secretary could talk about the way the DIR establishes prevailing wages in industries. We may want to look at doing something like that in this as well.
Great, thank you, Doug. Yeah. Okay, if are there any other comments or anything? Maria, I saw you nodding. Oh, yeah.
It looks like Dr. Coley has her hand raised.
Oh, great, Dr. Cole, I was looking for you. Perfect.
Not a problem. I too commend both of you for this. Just two minor things. One, and I think this was mentioned by someone else, when you talk about partner with community colleges, I would put it along the continuum of high school community colleges and four-year institutions, because I think those are some of the things as a polytechnic that we're doing. I would also like to add, in terms of, again, the measures progress would be patents. We have students who are patenting their developments on campus, and so as well as faculty. So I'd like to add patents as another measure of progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great point. And I don't see a limit on education. I saw the note from Roy on high school and certainly community colleges. I don't think we intended to use that to be restrictive in our view.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you again, Tom and Maria. We will let me move us on to the next priority area, unless anybody has anything else that's pressing. The next one is eliminate working poverty, and that is Betty and Saru.
I think Betty is straddling two meetings, so I'm going to step in and get us started, and then she'll.
I'll help out.
Cool. So, we appreciate everybody giving feedback in the last meeting. That helped a lot in our thinking, and also just want to apologize because we are so crazy busy. There's an election happening in 2 weeks, so everybody's super slammed. But we thought we could at least provide a framework through this. Ideas of moving shot and 5-year goals. And then I think the biggest picture for us, for Betty and I, was, you know, the moonshot we wanted to propose is to eliminate working poverty, actually do that, reduce working poverty by actually 100% over 10 years in some key large sectors. We were thinking hospitality, retail, care, and gig. I just want to say from the outset, worker advocates who are leading each of those sectors need to define for themselves how it will look like in each sector. So we're not prescribing how it will look for any of these sectors. I mean, I would like to have a big role in hospitality, but other than that, we're not here prescribing the other sectors. We just wanted to provide a framework. So overall, you know, the big moonshot is to reduce working poverty by 100% for workers. And we, in those key sectors over 10 years, as measured, we thought by the MIT Living Wage Calculator. There are many other standards we can use, but, you know, just as a starting point, really reduce working poverty based on that measure for these sectors. In terms of the 2 to 3 key actions over a 5-year period, we basically made 3 categories: income support or raising wages, building worker power, and enhancing worker resiliency. In the wage section, we think it's important to continue to not only raise the floor, but also eliminate the sub-minimum wage that still exists for incarcerated workers and workers with disabilities in California. And that could be done through legislation, but raising wages could also be done through partnerships with high road employers that the state uplifts and promotes, as we've been doing in the hospitality sector with Governor Newsom and Secretary Sue. High road employers who raise their wages far above the minimum and put pressure on other industry leaders who don't. And then also retool some of the EITC and other income support programs. So those were some of the key things we were thinking about in the income support bucket. Building worker power bucket, we definitely, as I said, want to leave this to each of the worker advocates in these, but we definitely want to improve labor enforcement, create new supports for workers to organize in unions and worker associations, support worker ownership and you know, really grow that statewide, and establish new mechanisms for workplace democracy. So to think both about worker power statewide and in workplaces at the same time.
Sarah, can I jump in here on this
Yes.
one? So I think in terms of just looking over the 3 to 5 year period, you know, this need to focus on labor enforcement. You know, I think there is kind of a measure associated here with just trying to attain full compliance with wage and hour laws, and then also introducing a focus on funding worker organizations to conduct some of the enforcement statewide. So really kind of building out, you know, just kind of the players to be sure we can attain full compliance.
Thank you so much, Betty, for making sure I didn't pass that over. And then the last bucket being resiliency, especially the moment revealed that we weren't resilient as a state. So really extending not just unemployment insurance, but other benefits with unemployment insurance, really ensuring that it is not based on prior income, increasing reskilling for quality jobs through more job training and apprenticeship programs, especially industries like mine, where we're going to see a significant shrinkage and literally maybe even up to 1 million workers will need to be considered for reskilling, and then advocate for policies that advance full employment. So, you know, the resiliency piece became most apparent now. So that's why we wanted to make sure that that is a 3 to 5 year bucket. And we thought, you know, all players can participate in this. You know, I think people think about raising wages as only a legislative fix, but that is not, that's not how we're thinking about it. We're thinking about it as the potential for legislation, the potential obviously for organizing, both of unions and worker organizations, the potential for the private sector to engage in high road behavior and be uplifted for that, and then for low road actors or people who aren't engaging in high road behavior to be pushed and pressured to do so. So clear roles for all of the stakeholders. Betty,
Thank you so much, Sarah and Betty. Perfect. So I'm going to open it up for questions, comments. Other ideas, clarification? John?
Yes. Thank you, Saru and Betty, very much for this. I really wanted to embrace and appreciate the emphasis on workplace democracy and worker empowerment. You know, this has been a really fundamental sort of goal of, I think, all of us, and certainly UFCW. Today, I am very proud and honored to have Black Lives Matter virtual background that was created by our Seattle local 21, recently when they had to challenge one of our largest employers, Kroger, which has banned our members from wearing Black Lives Matter buttons on the job. This is, you know, for some people maybe a symbolic struggle, but really, you know, particularly for members in retail and any job where there's a customer service component to it, the racism, frankly, in society that you have to deal with on a daily basis is something our members struggle with, and the union is an important vehicle to address those concerns which take place at the workplace. And I just can't emphasize that enough, whether the workplace is a store or a factory or an algorithm in a smartphone app. Those last ones can be some of the worst supervisors, you know. So I really appreciate that. And also the emphasis on enforcement. The two areas that I did want to just sort of raise and ask about, the gig sector is in here, and I think that's a new inclusion since the last time. This has been a really difficult to define part of the labor market, and I think there's been a lot of confusion about it, and it's been associated with what I'll call misclassification. And so I just want to say that to the extent that that phrase is used in any specific proposals, I would really want to be very detailed and specific about how that's used and make sure it's not a problem. But again, I appreciate your acknowledgement of all the work that advocates and unions are doing in these other various areas. And certainly to the extent that any of these proposals become more specific with regard to retail, we are very ready to work with you and others on that.
Yeah, that's great, John. And I think, you know, what I would say about just the way we presented this is does preserve really the flexibility that I think we're going to need to get into the specifics. And as Saru said, even with respect to income support and wages, not being specific about, you know, how we get there, but there are many ways to get there. And I think that's true with each of the three areas, whether it's, you know, income support, enforcement, or building worker power and enhancing worker resiliency. But very much wanted to focus on the sectors that we've identified since we've seen really firsthand what's happened, you know, more recently to them.
Can I?
Yeah, Carla.
Yeah.
I mean, Mariana, sorry.
Yeah. Carla is my other half. Did you all look at wage boards? I mean, I know there's like, you know, historically there's different analysis on like whether they were effective or not, but it's more thinking about this question of worker power and establishing kind of mechanisms or new like infrastructure for workers to negotiate and continually bargain for wages versus how how wages go up now is through bills and, you know, legislation, but that in it having some kind of board or mechanism for workers could actually incentivize workers, you know, joining organization. But it's also, it creates a different forum for how to negotiate wages. So I don't know if you all looked at those models at all.
And thank you so much, Mariana. Sarah and Betty, if it's okay, I'm going to take Dr. Coley's comment also.
Okay.
So we can start to generate some conversation, and then I'll take notes too, and I know you are on the comment. So Dr. Coley?
Yes, and again, I really commend the group for pulling these ideas together. And this comment may, I think, will apply across a number of these areas, because there is certainly an appreciation of the need for reskilling, upskilling, and just training. And I think that as a state, we really need to talk about the digital divide, because that is going to be an inhibitor But at the same time, it can be a facilitator of people getting the training that is needed. So again, I don't think it's tied to a particular priority, but I think there's some general infrastructure types of needs that come from our recommendations.
Yeah. And Dr. Coley, I would agree with you. And I think, Julie, there probably are a number of those issues that are just cross-cutting that likely will need to be identified as it applies to all of our areas. To Mariana's point, I think and this is, I think, the work to be done between now and when we convene next, and that is the level of specificity. Because I think we really identified these three actionable areas after identifying a number of strategies that could be employed across all of these sectors. And so rather than being specific, we wanted to capture all of them, but be flexible, understanding that it's not going to be a one size fits all across industries. And so, and I guess Julie and Alande, that's my kind of fundamental question is how specific do you want us to be? Do you want us to develop some of these more? Is this the right kind of flexibility for the governor? I mean, that's my overarching question. So there's certainly
and before you answer that, I would just say to what I said at the beginning, I think that worker advocates need to take their particular sector and say what's needed in their sector rather than us doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
For hospitality, but wage boards may work for you guys, Mariana, but may not work for other sectors. So I just think each sector we think these are 4 sectors to focus on. Happy to take one of them off if people don't want them there. But we thought these are the sectors to focus on because they're the biggest sectors of low wage workers. And then I think the process should not be us writing down details for each of them, but rather worker advocates for each of those sectors kind of take this overall framework and saying what should happen in each of those 3 buckets. That would be my proposal.
Yeah, no, and that it's just getting clarity on that next step about what level of specificity you want.
I think let me just, Betty, echo that what Saru said and what you're concurring with, and it was kind of how we've approached this work with all the co-leads, right? I think the level of specificity at which these proposals are being brought forth today is about the right level. I mean, we may need to tweak, and at the end, we're going to look to see how they all fit together, as I've said before. But I think what Saru said is absolutely correct, right? As the governor acknowledges all the time, California is a big state with, what James at one point called, a mosaic in terms of its economy. And there's lots of different things that are going to be needed by industry, by geography, by community, and different places that different again, regions, industries, communities, workers are at in terms of their own efforts to pursue some of these goals. So I don't think we need to be more prescriptive at this point. And the exciting thing is when I look at all of these, because of the work of this commission and the ideas that have been generated throughout, we've always said that this work was not just meant to end in a report. It was meant to generate efforts, initiatives, and the like. And there's been a lot of that even with what's being proposed now. So, it may be that at some point, there's all the ideas that came out of the commission that happened because of the generative process here and the work you all did that's more specific, but that doesn't have to be in what comes out in December.
Could I propose maybe one thing though?
Of course, Sarah.
To think about a recommendation from Betty in this category being some kind of a structured way, a committee, or some structured way in which the worker advocates for each of those sectors actually do end up getting to be the shape the work in that sector. Like, could we propose as part of this document I don't know, a task force, a committee that includes the leaders of each of those worker advocates from each of those sectors that would further define, even if we're not going to further now, could we propose a structure that then include those leaders who would define it? Am I making sense?
So that's also really important. I just want to also remind us of something we said along the way, which is that, the end of the commission's life is not going to be the end of the work. It's the beginning of it. And we had in the original proposal, this was supposed to happen throughout 2020 before 2020 exploded on us, which was to do a rollout of the recommendations, if you recall, with different communities, right? By bringing in, worker centers and educational institutions and philanthropy, right? And, venture capitalists, and really relying on collaborating with all of you to bring forward various sectors of California to do that. So there may be it's not part of the recommendations, but it is part of when the report comes out, right? And the governor accepts the recommendations, that here is the rollout plan for this. So I think there's ways that, and I made a note too, that we will make sure to take into account whatever ideas people have about that today. We'll come back with some thoughts about that at the next convening, if that makes sense.
Maybe Julie, it's just, I think what would be appropriate is just a recognition that there has been work done in these respective areas. And so not to have that be lost, or certainly not to have people kind of start from the ground up again, but that there is a lot of work in progress. And as part of the rollout, and this is not just in the worker advocate space, but certainly in the private sector space and the social enterprise space. So I think if there's a way to just kind of just recognize that we're not starting from ground zero. We actually, the next piece of it should be everyone kind of coming together and figuring this out. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Julie, if I may, again, my apologies joining late here, but I wanted just to amplify a few things you just described, Julie, which is, I think one of the things that we've come to appreciate is that what this commission can do is to really set out the big goals in these areas. And the ideas that we come up with in some ways are just a start. They're not going to be the be all to end all on all the ideas. So even if we come with particular sectors or particular actions, I think that is intended to be a starter list, not the comprehensive list, and that there's going to be ongoing work that should be done and should be unleashed, as Julie suggested, to add more ideas as we kind of hopefully proceed towards achieving the moonshot goals in each of these areas. And I would also mention one other quick thing, which again, to amplify something Secretary Sue said, which is, if you remember, one of the things we when Mary Kay and I put out the the principles for these for the social compact, was this idea that we wanted to involve everybody. That was actually one of the principles. So the idea that, in fact, hopefully these are ideas that multiple stakeholders will participate in: workers, employers, universities, training educational institutions, civic society. I think we wanted to include everybody. So I think, to your suggestion, Saru, if there are structures we can create that actually allow all these participants to participate and add even more ideas, I think we want that. But let's be, probably it's worth being clear that the particular actions or sectors or otherwise that we come up with are really just a running start, a starting point. And it's work that, should continue and others should add to it. Won't be the end of all of it, I don't think.
Thank you, James. John, you had another comment, yes?
Yeah, no, I think I certainly agree with this sort of notion of trying to be sort of humble in the sense that we can't solve every sort of issue entirely in this process, and that the process will sort of be larger and ongoing, and will just continue when our work officially ends. And certainly I would embrace, Saru's suggestion about engaging specific, structures for advocates and stakeholders in particular areas to engage. Because I do think, there's a tension between the general and the specific here. I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge that there are some proposals out there which are claiming to be seeking to address issues of worker empowerment, but that frankly, they're being proposed by companies that are seeking to engage in regulatory arbitrage. And I don't want this commission to inadvertently endorse something that then is utilized in a way that we did not intend. And so I think we have to be very clear. So if there's going to be a mention of the gig sector, for example, and certainly if there's going to be proposals that touch on the retail sector, I want to make sure that we're very clear about what we are and are not proposing.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, John. I'm taking note of that. Okay, I think I'm going to move on to the next.
Julie, I just wanted to say, given everybody, I do think it's phenomenal. I just want to pause for a second. that the ambition of the commission is to eliminate working poverty. I just think that is frickin' phenomenal. That like a civil society group could recommend to a governor that we're going to put every aspect of our society together to deal with it. And so I really appreciate the comments, but I just wanted to elevate the top of what Saru and Betty served up to us as a huge step forward for this commission. Thank you.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. So let's move on to the next group. This is priority 3, create a 21st century worker benefits model and safety net. And this is Carla and Mariana.
Okay, can we show this PowerPoint? Is that on tap here? Oh, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of set up the thought, and then Mariana will reveal the big moonshot that we've come up with. And I just wanted to start by saying I've loved working with Mariana, and I have learned so much from all of you. I am inspired by the moonshots, just as Mary Kay just said that others have already proposed. So it's really exciting. Glad we're getting to this point. On this, I want to just set the table for this in this way. We have learned that 1 in 3 Californians who work make $15 an hour or less. I hope that we are wildly successful in ending working poverty and in getting people to the, to just get employers to pay more and, thus people to be able to earn more. I think what we're looking at here is how to create more of a safety net and worker support environment where we're combining work and support in a way that makes it possible for people to have a decent life. And so we're trying to bring the two together to amplify workforce participation and improve economic and social conditions for everybody. We also know that there are work adjacent issues that create barriers to employment. As I just mentioned, 8 million people with criminal records in California makes it really hard to get a job. We've all been hearing about occupational licensing with the firefighters, who are people who are in prison, who are fighting fires and can't even become firefighters when they get out because of occupational licensing. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And of course, if you're homeless, it's very hard to work, and it's very hard to not be homeless anymore if you don't have work. And so there are a lot of different issues, and we've mentioned here also, of course, access for workers without documents to be able to get benefits. So there are these adjacent issues that are related to creating a much more inclusive economy. We also get into this topic of benefits for people who have multiple employers, make it easier to change jobs, for people, by making sure they can continue to access benefits, whether they're employed by a single employer or not. And we are acutely aware of the issues that I think John was raising specifically, but others have raised, that we should not misuse the idea of having portable benefits to misclassify employees and let employers not take the responsibility of paying for benefits and providing benefits to their employees and allow for that give and take. So that is not the point. I think we should make a clear statement about that. We're not trying to provide an excuse for that, but we're trying to provide something really beneficial to a lot of people who couldn't otherwise access the kind of benefits and support that we need. And then we want to simplify the way benefits are accessed. I think Julie's got the scars, but many of us know how mixed up these systems are for accessing the variety of benefits that are available, and we need to simplify that. So the next slide, honestly, is just kind of a repetition to give you a sense of the specific problems that we think need to be addressed in order to deal with the problems I just mentioned. So I'm just gonna let that go, and Mariana is gonna reveal our big moonshot. Yes.
So next slide. So before we do that, so the framework, and I think we shared this on the last commission convening, there's sort of three big kind of buckets. So one is there's already existing benefits that are provided in California. So one is look at where we can reform some of them to be able to make them more accessible, make them more inclusive, even expand them. The second is thinking about expanding the safety net. What benefits are actually currently a need but aren't being provided. And then the third is thinking about the way benefits are accessed and delivered to ensure that all workers are able to access them. Some of this is around having an efficient system for eligibility and access. Some of them having a portable system that can aggregate prorated contributions when workers have multiple employers. Next slide. And so the big sort of moonshot sort of fits into that. We also set, similar to our other commissioners, we set, I think, an ambitious goal, actually the metrics, yeah. So one is that by 2030, California would create a benefit system that provides security to workers who currently do not have access due to either legal or practical exclusions. We want to transform the benefit system to be more inclusive, effective, efficient, including portable benefit systems, streamlined platform to facilitate navigation and access, and expanding the suite of benefits currently provided to Californians. The impact, how we would measure, is that the percentage of Californians that access benefits will be twice the number of those who access them today. And where at least half of those that gain access to benefits are concentrated among people with low or very low and extremely low incomes.
Okay. So you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to read you every word of this extremely dense slide. But just to say, we've been trying to do our homework because obviously, I mean, this topic is kind of large. You know, it's an octopus of, you know, there's a lot of different benefits that we're talking about here. And so we have tried to summarize some of the key benefits that workers need access to. And I'm just going to reference just a few points on this slide that I think are important. Number one, obviously, we start with health insurance and pension. There are a million proposals for these, but, you know, look, obvious point. More people, especially low-wage workers, need access to health insurance and pension. Paid time off, there's probably never been a time, at least in my lifetime, when it's been so clear that people must have access to paid time off, and too many people do not. And emphasis on paid. They've got to be paid while they're off. So that's part of the portable benefits discussion we've just had. The next point I wanted to make is this. We easily could have done, and in some ways I wish we had done, a separate moonshot that is about apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship. It's really about paid training. We have too many very low-wage workers who could skill up and could move into better jobs, but they can't afford to do it and take care of their families. And it's very hard. We pay for training. We may subsidize education, but as in an education context, there's the scholarship for the person. There also need to be payments to people who access other forms of training so that they can skill up. And one way we do that is sort of folded into this notion of apprenticeship, but it needs to be more flexibly done. And of course, pre-apprenticeship is incredibly important as a category for people who perhaps have very little work experience and really need that starting point. So we're really promoting this idea of more apprenticeship, more paid training, paying people to train. And then clearing other barriers. It's hard to categorize this, but this is very important, especially for people coming out of incarceration, to clear credit and be able to sort of start on a level playing field once they start working, and that is an issue for work. And then the earned income tax credit is, of course, a specific subsidy for people who work. We're advocating that there be, we'll say in a minute, both an easier way to access the EITC through automatic filing and monthly payments, and also an expansion and compliments to the governor and to California. We've expanded the EITC, but we still need to do more for single adults, one-child families, workers without documentation. And then we do mention childcare, obviously an incredibly important worker support, asking for universal 0 to 5 childcare. I know this has been a top priority of the governor, so we're advocating for that. And of course, there's a concurrent issue about paying people who provide childcare sufficiently. And then lastly, affordable housing. We haven't really wanted to make this central, but if you're talking about worker supports in a state like this, and you want people to be able to have a decent life, I think we must at least reference the need for people to have access to rent subsidies so that they can afford housing in one of the most expensive housing markets in the United States. Next page, please. And then the last, yes, we can, Roy is mentioning building more housing. Yes, we have that in there. I mean, all investments in affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, housing affordable to extremely low income people, rent subsidies. I mean, take your pick. This is a huge topic, but we think we should be very supportive as a commission. And then we kind of made this rocket to go alongside the moonshot, kind of the vehicle to get there. And here we're really talking about, can't we get into the 21st century with access to benefits? We have that as consumers, et cetera, but you try to get access to these public benefits, and it is just a blizzard of differentiated, requirements and different offices you have to go to, and it really makes no sense. So and it's very costly. So we would like to see reform to the way benefits are provided, a portable benefits platform, and then we make a number of other suggestions about how to kind of make benefits more accessible to the individuals who really need them. And then Mariana is going to wrap up with some thoughts on financing.
Right. So part of this is, a lot of this requires additional money, especially, I think in some ways a lot of what we focused is on workers. I think, there's another moonshot we could think about around the safety net and benefits, which is sort of a principle around, everyone that lives in California should have access to some level of social guarantee and benefits. But of course, then the question is financing. So next slide. So we haven't actually vetted any of these, and it might be that this is sort of similar, where part of the recommendation is really doing some research around financing and revenue models to be able to kind of build up and provide both the new systems, but also the expansion of some of these benefits. So these were some ideas that were sort of initially throwing out, but maybe we should include in there some kind of research body that can look more into each of these, and also think about each benefit and kind of the funding mechanism for it. So the first, obviously, is working within the current pie, is reallocating from defunding certain parts of the California budget towards these sort of benefits. The second is thinking about taxation, millionaire, billionaire tax, looking at property tax, right? There's, ballot initiative right now that's looking at in terms of Prop 13, and then looking at payroll tax, like social insurance programs. That's something that we've thought about for the care sector. And then the third is thinking about funds that are both a public and private partnership, so that there'd be contributions from the state, from the federal government, from philanthropy, from employers, to be able to provide these benefits. And obviously there may be others, and as I said, I think this requires a little bit more research, but I think across the board is this question of financing, especially as we go into 2021. And there's already conversation around austerity budgets. Like, this is an important question to think about, how we kind of increase financing in the budget. The last slide. Oh, so again, the measuring process, I think that we already said this around what we want to measure by 2030. We want to increase the number of Californians who access benefits by 2, and then making sure that those who are accessing those benefits are coming from low and extremely low income workers. Last slide. Yeah, so want to just open it up now to any questions.
Wonderful. Assemblymember Kalra and Roy. Go
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. A great presentation. On a couple comments on it. The budget reallocation, I think we'll see pretty soon in a couple of weeks whether there may be some Prop 13 adjustment or not. So that'll help hopefully guide us as we finalize some of the documents and budget sources. But the millionaire tax, as well as looking at payroll, certainly millionaire tax was floated this year for the first time, and the legislature didn't really go very far, but at least it was the beginning of that conversation, as well as budget reallocation, which has been happening a lot through different policies, whether it's closing prisons, moving more to social services, mental health, what have you. So that's a great, there's a lot of places where we can do that kind of budget reallocation on a large scale in a number of our departments. On the specific items, I really like expansion of paid time off, what have you. Of course, I had a bill this year that would have had a modest increase in sick days just for public health emergencies, and I had a boulder dropped on my head. So it's definitely a big endeavor that I appreciate being on the list, because it's going to take all of us, so to speak, to see success with that. Increasing Cal EITC, and I think someone made even a comment on this. Of course, this year, expanding it to I-10 so that undocumented workers can have access was a huge priority of ours in the legislature and the governor. And so I agree 100%. We have to continue. It's been a very successful program. So glad to see the acknowledgement of that success. And the last thing, and I've been kind of a broken record on our healthcare, and my being a proponent of a single payer, partly because even with finding portability or other avenues, it doesn't do enough on cost containment, and access is not necessarily affordable access, and it'll just be more of an investment of taxpayer money to subsidize the affordability component rather than dealing with the profit-driven aspect of it. And I just think, ideologically, having employment attached, healthcare attached to employment, kind of going all in on a system that I just believe doesn't work as much. That's the only area that, and I think you could probably guess it based upon my comments in the past, but otherwise I really like apprenticeship. All these ideas that are coming forward are all things that I believe are spot on in terms of where we should be putting our energy in the next several years to prepare for our changing workforce. And as a former public defender, really appreciate the comments on formerly incarcerated. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Roy had his hand up, and then I see James.
Yeah, thank you, Ash, for that. That was terrific to hear your nuanced perspective on that and share that. I have a question which is maybe a discussion topic, which is, and if I missed it, I apologize, but my question is what I want to say about guaranteed income, universal basic income, however we want to put it, because, and I'm not proposing that we say we should endorse it and push it, and I realize it is in some ways beyond the scope of just being worker focused, but if we think about our commission's report as wanting to stand the test of time, and I believe the early indications from Stockton suggest that the provision of some level of guaranteed income may enable people to work who otherwise would not have been able to. And if it turns out that 20 years from now, the most significant change in the American shape of the government to, or society to worker relationship is that, and we have one of the most innovative public officials in the country experimenting with it in a California city, you know, shame on us as a commission if we're silent on it. So I personally believe we ought to say something appropriate to what's happening. And this feels, of all the priority areas, like the place to put it. And again, apologies if I missed it, but that's my question for the commission, is what we ought to say.
Yeah, just to respond on, I think good. I'm glad you raised it. You know, the worker supports is a huge topic, and there's many worker supports, but UBI is obviously hot topic, getting a lot of discussion. And I think, you know, that I would, you know, I think Mariana and I can figure out how to integrate that. But love to hear what others think about it.
Yeah. And I think we did talk about, I think in some ways, I think that list of, you know, benefits, what may be interesting is to think about what's sort of universal, like healthcare that's not tied to employment necessarily, and what is sort of like kind of belongs in sort of a worker benefits. And it seems like there's a whole list of things that could be under the kind of like.
And I guess what I'm trying to open up the space for us to discuss is, while it's tempting to treat all of our recommendations as a list of we shoulds, you know, we should do X, Y, Z, and here's what's definitive. And of course, you know, in section 5, we've got something there. It might be for some bigger, more complicated areas that the answer might be, you know, expressing some initial support, curiosity, willingness to study and pay attention to it, just drawing attention to it in the right way versus flat out saying California shall. And universal basic income might be one of those where a little more nuance might be appropriate. I don't know.
Yep.
And yes, and I see Governor Granholm put in the point about making EITC monthly, which I think is tied up with exactly the same issues. I mean, I think many of the guaranteed income supporters believe the best way to do it would be with a more regular EITC.
James.
Thank you. My comments are mostly to try and respond to the questions that Carla and Mariana put at the end of their presentation. And just to unequivocally say, I think this is a terrific moonshot. I think in many respects, in my mind at least, it achieves what I think Governor Granholm, and I think it was Tom and a few others, pushed us in our early meetings, which is to say, let's have some signature and kind of moonshots. I'll tell you the particular parts of that I think resonate a lot. I think the fact that not only do you have a clear priority area, but you've actually got a goal by 2030, which is to you know, double the number of people in California who have access to supports. And I think that's a big deal, because that becomes a goal that we can actually measure whether we're making progress to that or not. So I like that part a lot. I also like the fact that you've also double clicked into several areas, and you have what feels like milestone interim goals for those on the run up to 2030. So that gives us something to particular areas to think about what progress is being made. So in that sense, this is just to say I'm thrilled. I think this is a great moonshot. Clearly, there's a lot of work to be done. I don't know whether on this commission we'll be able to work through all the financing and all the practical implementation, but I think at least by giving us a clear set of goals, I think then it gives everybody something to work towards. I do want to acknowledge also Roy's point, which is I think it would be good to encourage, just like Saru earlier suggested, structures. I think to the extent that we think that there are experiments or things to be done or to be learned, of which maybe you know, UBI falls in that category, Roy. I think they can certainly be part of the actions within a given moonshot. So I guess all of that, Marianne and Carlos, just to say thank you. I think this is exactly the kind of thing we're trying to frame. In fact, you've created a bit of a high bar for the rest of us here a bit, but that's all good.
Yeah, this is that's really helpful, and I think it is the. I mean, I think that matrix. I think, you know, there's a lot of detail, and a lot of these programs are beyond Carla and mine's expertise, and so the question is like how detailed we get. But I do agree that we can think about where there could be demonstration projects or pilots or kind of further engagement into some of these ideas, especially one like the kind of more innovative ones like UBI, et cetera, that we can think about putting forth.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next group, but let me just say again, because I think this is relevant to all the areas and our path forward, right? Which is that I really appreciate what Mariana said, that there's, you know, each of us, each of the co-leads was not necessarily an expert in the area, but just coming up with these, what I think are really not just, you know, bold, but actually really inspiring ideas about what we want our California economy to look like, what we want that social compact with workers to be. I feel like we're, you know, it makes sense for us to stay at that level and to think about what, again, in the rollout, we might pull in people who are experts in certain things to try out certain things too. So we don't have to get that, you know, we don't have to figure all of those things out here, but I really appreciate what acknowledge Mariana and Carla for digging in, because one of the questions I did have was, you know, what for this particular area, what would the financing look like? Because that's going to be an automatic question to an idea like this. So thank you so much for doing the hard work and pulling that all together. So let's move on to the next priority area, which is priority area 4, raising the standard and share of quality jobs. And I'm going to turn that over to Lance and John.
Okay, so Lance, why don't I start out and then you can follow up. You know, we took this recommendation area for the job quality index and tried to do 2 things. And I think, you know, really the goal was to take a lot of the input that we've received over the last year in various areas, you know, different initiatives, both these public-private partnerships, government programs, other sort of academic research attempts to define job quality and try to create a structure that they can live in. And so we have essentially a 2-part proposal. The first is to create a California job quality index. And at the start, at least, it would be modeled on the Cornell Law School's job quality index, which focuses on 2 key factors that produce weekly earnings. Essentially what this analysis does is it takes monthly data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and analyzes whether or not the jobs that are being created in the economy are below the median or above the median weekly earnings. And so this is obviously, it's far from a holistic and complete picture of job quality, but because it incorporates both hourly pay and the number of hours worked, it incorporates 2 of the fundamental sort of economic bases of job quality. And there is other data to suggest that some other job quality indicators are correlated with those. And so it may not be a bad place to start. In particular, we think that it can create a framework for us as Californians to take a look at what exactly are the jobs that we have here on a sort of a past-looking basis, as well as a new job creation forward-looking basis, and see what really is the quality of those jobs. We can compare the job quality and contrast the job quality by region, by sector of the economy, and we can look at other factors, including demographics. And in particular, we highlighted racial and gender disparities in job creation and job quality, which we thought would be an important perspective to view this from. We also acknowledged And, I had the opportunity to speak, in the past with Carla about some of these issues. We do not intend that this would foreclose the opportunity for transitional job training programs or social enterprises that are seeking to make work available for populations that have been marginalized by the traditional labor market. Not at all. Hopefully this would provide a structure and a framework that those kinds of programs could fit into, because we would be identifying sectors of the economy that are not only perhaps creating poor quality jobs, also sectors of the economy that are creating higher quality jobs where there may be a lack of available labor, and could target training programs and other programs to produce workers who are qualified to take those good jobs. So I think we absolutely want to underscore that. Some of the other metrics that we heard from, for example, from the Good Jobs Institute at MIT, we mentioned here as being important elements of the analysis that we would want to incorporate into the first aspect of the proposal, the Job Quality Index. The second aspect of the proposal is what we're calling the California Job Quality Incubator. And this would be really the opportunity to take the work from the analysis phase into the action phase. And in our proposal, we envision twice a year, the state of California, led by the labor agency and with GO-Biz, would convene stakeholders from business and industry, from labor, from stakeholder and community groups across the board to look at the analysis that has been created over the previous 6 months through the California Job Quality Index, identify the areas where there's opportunities to flow state resources to expand the pool of good jobs, identify programs that would fit, and at the same time, identify areas where there are underperforming jobs that are not at the standards and the quality that we in California are hoping to achieve. And I should also point out that this is something that's not part of the Cornell Law School's JQI, but we thought would make sense is the MIT Living Wage Calculator could be a screen that would be applied to the California JQI. So we wouldn't just be looking at job quality relative to a median, but really relative to specific thresholds that are relevant for local labor markets. And so that would be an important aspect. At the same time, this would be an opportunity, this job quality incubator, to convene all of our state resources, right? The procurement dollars, the tax incentives, all of the training and workforce development dollars that the state of California has at its disposal, which are quite considerable, and really make sure that they are being targeted to achieve the right outcomes that we're all seeking in terms of creating quality jobs. Let's see, and additionally, I think part of the advantage of having all the stakeholder groups at the table in that second phase of this proposal is that we would really be able to target strategic enforcement efforts where those are needed in the underperforming job categories and specific areas of the economy. Stakeholder groups, labor unions, other worker organizations can be partners with the labor agency and others in enforcing the laws and the legal standards that we have in California to make sure that jobs are at the appropriate level. So let me pause there and hand it over to Lance.
Thanks, John. And I just want to state for our record that the opportunity to work with John on this has been, real enlightening, encouraging, because we're focused on a solution, but the collaboration that he and I have been able to develop over the last 8 months or so, great pairing. Whoever devised the algorithm to pair John and I did a fantastic job in terms of getting some output. So thanks Dad. Thank you, John. I'll start at the second part of it on the incubator. That may likely be the most enduring thing that we could do because it presupposes an ongoing engagement with all the stakeholders on what a job quality index might look like in California. And that really is the sweet sauce for this. And if it's the highlight of one of the commission outputs, I think that'll be one of the most literally enduring measurements for us to put on the table. But how we measure the jobs becomes important. So we had the opportunity to visit with some folks from other states to see what they're doing. And I think that we're kind of the conclusion that a job quality index is great if it's more uniform than less, because if a job quality is measured differently in California than it is even with our neighboring states, we may be missing a trick because the economies tend to get more regionalized, and having that uniformity. And there was some excitement from our other state counterparts that, you know, if this initiative leads to that broader job quality index discussion across the country, again, that'll be another contribution that this commission is able to make. One issue that I just want to add to the entirety of our discussion, but certainly here in the space, we need to look at opportunities to grow the pie. I mean, I heard comments earlier from the other work groups about looking for additional revenue sources. One way to do that is to grow the pie. And if we grow the pie with quality jobs, I don't need to tell you what the net effect of that could be across the state and local budgets. So let's always keep a mindful eye of not settling for the pie that we have, because during the pandemic, we all know it's shrinking pretty precipitously. But let's look at ways how we can grow the pie so that we'll have other opportunities to have higher quality jobs, not only in California, but in the region. And the magic of, you know, a goal, which is the moonshot, for every, you know, lower quality job, that there are 1.5 more, that is our opportunity for growth right there. And I think it's a convention that John came up with that is fantastic because that really gives us something to shoot for as we proceed. But you know, I'll close here to say thanks for assigning John and I to work together. This is one of the things, I think it came up in the very first convening in Sacramento, the notion of a job quality index and how it's measured. So the fact that we've been able to keep that thread throughout all of the convenings and now have a work product related to it, you know, has been great. But I'll have to close with, let's find ways to grow the pie so that we can have these other broader discussions. Thanks, and thanks, John.
Thank you so much, Lance and John. Comments, Saru?
Question, sorry. Thank you, John and Lance. I'm just a little confused because this is more for you, Julie, I guess, less for, what was this? I thought this was the bucket that was not just about, I thought this was the bucket that was about job creation in addition to job quality increase. I don't know if that makes sense. I thought that the thing about creating high quality jobs was both about job creation and about increasing the quality of jobs, or measuring and increasing the quality of jobs. And if that's not the case, is there another bucket that's dealing with job creation? Sorry if I'm dense or stupid here, but, and I don't know if this is what you're referring to, Lance, with growing the pie. If it was part of this, beyond or I guess, are there job creation, high quality job creation recommendations in here that I'm not understanding? Sorry. I didn't sleep much, so I don't feel like I'm not being very articulate.
No, very articulate and not stupid at all. Lance, do you want to address the growing the pie comment?
Well, we'll try. The work stream we thought we had was to, you know, establish the job quality in California. One way to do that is to measure it. So maybe that's step one. Step one will result in more quality jobs if we've identified a strategy. And John's point earlier about having the ongoing discussion with all the stakeholders, that's where more can occur rather than we sit around and just measure things. So having those discussions, that's the enduring part of, I think, what we're proposing. John, if I'm on the wrong path, please get me straight.
No, absolutely. As always, Lance, you're on the right track. I think, you know, Saru, the specific intention really is in that second part of the proposal to say, okay, look, we as the state of California have billions of dollars at the discretion of, you know, our democratically elected officials to say, look, this is where we're going to flow funds. A big chunk of it is obviously in terms of tax subsidies, procurement, lots of other areas where we do have resources. And absolutely, the goal would be to create more better jobs through those programs. And we don't know exactly what those would be at any particular point in time, and certainly not today. We're not seeking to identify what specific jobs would be created, but that structure would be able to bring people together to identify those projects, and then everything would have to be sort of given the test. Like, is this actually a quality job?
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
if I could jump in, sorry, if it's helpful from a overall kind of architecture of these buckets, as you pointed out, I think the this particular bucket area had kind of quality job as its primary focus, whether it's turning existing jobs into better quality jobs, whether it's creating new quality jobs, but quality was the primary, I think, idea around this one. Now, when it comes to job creation in general, if you remember in our principles, I think we suggested that creating quality jobs was always going to be one of the, just like we have equity and quality was one of the key considerations that should run through all of these things. And if you remember, priority area number one, bucket number one, which began this conversation, is about making sure that there's enough work for people who want work. So obviously implied within that is the job creation. Similarly, as you will hear from area number 5 when Roy and I go through that, that's focused on kind of future proofing and jobs of the future, which we hope are quality and hope will be created as quality jobs. I think the creation of jobs that are quality in some ways cuts across many of these areas, but I think this one had as its goal making sure jobs in California, either new or existing, are quality jobs.
Okay.
I'll just add, because I think it is an important question, and to pick up on what was already said but not repeat it, there are specific components of this proposal in the second half of it, which, as Lance already said, go back to, and John said, go back to earlier conversations, just to kind of thread this through the life of the commission's work. And so there, there's the procurement piece in here, right? How procurement drives job quality. There's the tax expenditure. I think that we have not been, trying to legislate tax policy, although appreciate Assemblymember Kalra's acknowledgement of his role in that. And then there's also workforce development funding. And I just also want to acknowledge, of course, Betty Yee, who commented in the chat that she's really excited about this idea of the state pulling together all the right actors to think about this. So I think, so, to the extent that this is, again, at the level of not the exact specific policy, but kind of, to extend to pick up the metaphor that Carla and Mariana gave us, the rocket for how we might get there, bringing the right people together to think about these particular policy ideas as starting places, and possibly, trying to find within where the state already is doing, again, just to borrow from Betty's vision, where the state is already possibly subsidizing corporate behavior. How do we add job quality components to that? So I see you not, okay, so perfect. Yeah, let me just take, okay, so I see Carla. Go ahead, Carla. Carla, you're still on mute.
How's that? There.
Perfect.
Okay, sorry. So 3 quick points. Just love this set of recommendations. Point number 1, what job quality is. I get it. We want something simple that is universal. Makes a lot of sense, and appreciate the acknowledgement that there are some subtleties here. And I know I saw Mary Kay put up another question about worker representation. So how we define job quality is very important, I think, ultimately. And I'm not sure we've got a nuanced enough definition. So, but I get it. Like, you can't put the kitchen sink in there, or we can't get sort of universal adoption. So some thinking around that would be great. And of course, I want to see social enterprise, included in that, and training. Just acknowledgement of the training and other things in job quality. Second, I love this idea of the structure of accountability, in a sense. And I felt like Saru and Betty were also proposing a structure. So I just would commend that to the commission, to think about that. A good structure that's like, here's the measurable goals, here's how we're going to penetrate at the community level, get the right people at the table, here's how we're going to hold ourselves accountable on a regular basis. Something like that, I think, would make this a lot more credible. So that was point number 2. And point number 3, just maybe this relates a little to the point you were making, Saru. I'm sitting on the UCSF has adopted an anchor institution kind of umbrella for its work, and they're actually putting money into it. And that means that they're thinking about how they deploy their capital, their procurement, and their hiring in order to meet community needs. And I almost wonder if, maybe we're saying something like that, like if the state thought about its procurement, hiring, capital deployment in a more concentrated way to actually meet this goal of high road jobs, and better jobs and better job quality, inclusiveness, et cetera. Maybe that's a structure or a construct to consider. There are many health systems across the United States that have bought into that. And maybe there's just something creative here we could do as a state.
Thank you, Carla. I also just want to make sure, I don't know if Maria or Roy or even Lance, you want to make any comment about these, just to bring in all the perspectives? Oh, but I see, okay, Mariana and Doug, please.
Yeah. So I agree around how we kind of think about defining quality. And my comment is more on like less on new jobs, but more in terms of current jobs, and making sure that current jobs, in particular in low wage sectors, are raised or have at least minimum standards. So over the last year, for example, domestic workers have fought to win health and safety protections. SB 1257 was going to strike historical exclusion, and unfortunately it was vetoed. And so I think we're disappointed, especially in the midst of increased hazards with wildfires and the COVID pandemic, where domestic work has been recognized as essential, and yet we're just denying, these kind of basic protections, health and safety protections, and treating sort of these workers as second-class workers. And so I think part of and this may be too short-term, or but I think some of the audit needs to look at what workforces continue to be low quality and continue to be sort of denied sort of the minimum standard, let alone sort of raising up to sort of fairer standards. And so, we're disappointed, and we hope that we can make a commitment to ensure that every worker in California has these sort of basic protection. And in particular, speaking for our workforce, women of color who clean our homes and care for our children and our elderly. But I think it's just important and that could be, to me, it's like a low-hanging fruit in terms of how we make progress on this particular priority of making sure that jobs in California have some level of minimum standards and raising those over time.
Thank you, Mariana. Doug?
Thank you. I'm so excited about this that I'm going to try to keep my comments short. And I was thinking about a small group we had at one point in this, where we were talking about a procurement policy that's been passed in both the LA and San Francisco school districts and cities that is metric based, like what we're talking about here, creates a flexible framework, but that channels the considerable purchasing power of local government towards companies that meet our values. And in the case of that, these are businesses that supply food to those government agencies. And it's things like, do you value your workforce? Are you a local business? How do you treat animals? Things that we care about. And so what really excites me here is to talk about creating an index with very clear measurements, and again, targeting our purchasing power. And early on in this process, our fellow commissioner, Betty Yee, in her role as state treasurer, began the work of actually documenting the billions of dollars that go out the door of state government towards employers every year. And this is our chance really to tie that money, to leverage that money towards employers that are creating good jobs. And so we've been talking to, I see Ash Kalra's on here, who's interested in authoring legislation. I've floated some language around that I'm going to put in the chat box, but I would really like our commission to go on record to support legislation that would actually link our state spending towards high road job creation. So I will put that in the chat box, and I will shut up now. But thank you for the opportunity to speak on this.
Thank you, Doug. And I just want to acknowledge Lance and John's work on this. That is in their their proposal, and the acknowledgement also of our amazing State Treasurer Betty Yee.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Julie, if I may. I mean, Betty has been relentless on this, and I think we should all be grateful for her work on this. And Doug, you're right to bring this up, because if you remember early in the commission, we did have a discussion quite extensively, and I think John, you remember this too, just on the job quality index, and also the idea of making sure it did involve a range of considerations. And then we did have a discussion about, are there mechanisms, of which procurement is one, where this could be one of the levers to use on this front? So I just wanted to echo, Doug, your point, and Betty, the work you've been doing.
Yes, thank you, James.
Just one comment about Doug, the fact that our work stream got him excited and kept him brief, I think is a miracle in and of itself.
Maria, do you want to say anything on this?
I think this is, again, I think as these ideas bubble up, we're probably going to have to figure out how do we coalesce some of these, because it crosses over so much of the conversation that we were having around the spend, right? And I just read the notes that you put in there, Doug. And I mean, I think those are the type of things that can extend, some of these topics. Even when we're talking about entrepreneurship, I mean, Tom started talking about, those high growth type of jobs, organizations that lead to those jobs. So, agreed.
Controller Yee?
Betty, that's fine. I'm very excited about this, and I share Doug's excitement, but just to let you all know, and James, I think you've been keeping up with this, I did engage Rick Wartzman with the Drucker Institute while we were on hiatus as a commission, and he's developed, really through a survey mechanism, a set of metrics that we could use if we wanted to just develop a structure for how we look at some standards for procurement. So it's not something that I feel like is in the kind of long term, but it's something that we probably could attain in the near term. And Doug, I know we're going to recruit you in the next set of conversations, but the idea with these metrics is that they're not onerous on companies. It's information they have anyway that they disclose for many other purposes. And so it's just to get a better sense of how these companies are doing business and whether they are compatible and consistent with, certainly the goals and aspirations that we're all talking about. So work is in progress.
Thank you so much. And I did want to clarify that I was calling our controller a state treasurer, not confusing it with our state treasurer. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last one, and then we will have time for more conversations. So let's go to our priority area number 5, future-proofing California with jobs and skills to prepare for technology, climate, and other shocks. Roy and James.
Yeah, I'm happy to get us started here, then I'll hand over to Roy. If you remember, this one, we're trying to solve really for 2 things here. One is just to make sure we know that there's going to be future impacts from technology and other things that are part of the way our economy is evolving and the way technology innovation is progressing. So we've got that on the one hand, but we also know that there are other future things we want to be prepared for. Those include everything from, climate change, it's already here, to future pandemics. We have one right now, but we know that there are going to be all these external shocks. And so when we take those kind of twin future things that are coming and already here in many regards, how do we make sure work and workers are prepared to adapt to those two things? So we were imagining things that have to do with making sure that there are, in fact, jobs of the future that either play to those strengths and those changes, and that we design work and work looks like it's compatible and adaptable for work and workers in that future. So that's the jobs part. The other part speaks to the skills part and the adaptation for workers themselves to make sure that they've got the right skills and capabilities to adapt to that future. So it's very much of a future, but a future that we recognize is already here in many regards. So we're trying to solve for those two things, but with an ongoing, on an ongoing basis. And then we've got a crazy, some would say bold, but crazy idea at the back of this that Roy will frame. But Roy, let me hand over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy idea is, which I'll just do it at the front before getting back to it, is could we, as a commission, call on the federal government with California as some kind of backstop to provide a jobs guarantee, both around putting people to work and on directing people's activities to the jobs that are the jobs of the future. And we've looked at this a few different ways, and we think it is both bold and plausible, especially if we're looking at not doing it immediately, but building toward doing it over the next few years. And so, James laid out both on the side of preparing people for work supply and on the side of what kinds of work we think should be done, demand some of what we might do. And immediately, so just now zooming in on this priority area, an immediately actionable activity that we propose undertaking is that in a way that rhymes with the Job Quality Index, that the state government could articulate what criteria make something we can figure out the right phrase, but a quote unquote future job. How do we identify the areas in which we would like people to be working? One course measure is occupations that are growing. And if you look, only a third of Californians actually work in occupations that are growing at a rate of 5% or more per year. And our view is that while not every occupation has to be growing, of course, that all other things being equal, it's probably better for people in our state to be working on occupations that are in areas that the future wants to see more of. So defining that kind of future job is part of it. And then the second step is conceptualizing a relationship between the private sector and the public sector where we work together to have more people working in these future domains. And we want to avoid the public sector sort of picking winners narrowly, meaning saying, oh, we think people should work in such and such area, narrowly defined versus another. But instead, the private sector being the primary engine, with the public sector incentivizing employment in certain areas. It currently provides, as Stefan and others have raised, disincentives through tax and other ways toward employment. And then, the big ask is for the federal government to be the backstop. And the kinds of areas we have in mind are things like, it's actually very similar to the first priority area, green occupations, scientific research, needs where the public sector is the only entity that can ultimately create the demand, like disaster relief, for example. And so that framework of private sector led but public sector backstopped employment of the future feels to us like the kind of signature for which our commission could be known. And we've done some research on past efforts, but of course, they're either small or decades ago for the most part. And I think that's fitting that California should be looking to do things that other states are not necessarily in a position to do. And then James, give me and us some guidance on how we want to discuss this in light of other areas, but there's a portion of it, other priority areas, there's a portion of our conversation that is around this priority area number 5, where we can have goals for the percentage of Californians that are equipped to work in these future job areas and the percentage of Californians who actually work in these future jobs areas. But ultimately, something as big as a jobs guarantee only makes sense if we as a commission feel that it helps us deliver our goals across multiple areas. And so it's not just about this area number 5, even though that's where we began the conversation. That's sort of my overview. James, what would you add in? What did I miss?
No, you covered it pretty well, Roy. I'll just add a couple of things specific to number 5. We actually think, as you may have seen in the document, there's actually a role for everybody here. We think that, in fact, there are things we would hope the public sector would do, both in terms of supporting and encouraging, but also itself as an employer and a potential creator of these jobs. So there's a role for the public sector. We think there's a big role for the private sector to make sure it is, in fact, creating those jobs of the future, but also tackling a few other things. If you remember, we mentioned that part of the role is also the impact of technology itself on jobs. And so there are issues around technology use in the workplace, and also to making sure that technology is actually complementing and supporting work and workers. So there's a particular role for the private sector, both on the jobs themselves, but also the part of the private sector that is developing the technologies. We think there's an important role for educational and vocational training institutions here too, as there is a big role for work advocacy group, particularly also in shaping some of these technology in the workplace questions, but also making sure that in fact they have input and are participating in how to think about these jobs of the future themselves. So there's work for everybody here, and we try to highlight that. But it is quite stunning to see, and we've got some goals around, as Roy mentioned, around percentage of workers who would have particular skills, or percentage of workers who are in these jobs that are growing, and percentage of work that's being created in these future work that also helps the state prepare. So those are just some other things that are in the draft document that you all have seen, but this is all a work in progress. But we should probably open it up and get some comments and thoughts from others.
Comments, thoughts? Carla.
Sure. First, very exciting. These are just, I mean, I'm inspired listening to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I just a thought, maybe a specific thought. I think there's a lot to that private sector led, public sector, I don't know what we call it, but complement. And I just wanted to mention maybe 2 specific things in that regard, and it sort of ties back to the procurement, which I thought was really an interesting example that I had not known of. The Federal Highway Administration actually has an on-the-job training program that requires state transportation agencies to create training and apprenticeship initiatives. And I wonder if that might be just a model that we could look at for the kind of public-private partnership you're talking about in other areas like climate or technology or whatever it might be. And then maybe just I'll throw it in here because I wanted to just get this point in. Another resource is WIOA, the Workforce Investment Act. We're allowed to spend 10% of that money on transitional jobs in the state, which is training, essentially. And we only spend, I think, 1.5% of the money on that. So I think there are some opportunities within existing programs to create the sort of training pathways into these jobs of the future that we want, and sort of systems level existing programs at the federal level, at the state level. Caltrans is also doing some of this, that we could build on, but very exciting. Thank you.
Excellent. Saru?
Yeah, thank you so much, James and Roy. I'm super excited to I'll put my hand down. And it was what WPA and jobs guarantee was on my mind when I was asking and John. I mean, we also put it in ours, some kind of a go to full employment recommendations. So I do think it crosses across all the different priority areas. And I just want to say, I agree that it could be both publicly funded public sector jobs like the WPA was, and also some partnership with private sector. But I'd even take it a step further. It wouldn't just have to be private sector coming to us with green jobs or jobs of the future in the traditional sense, like solar and those kinds of things. I'll just give a quick example of something I've been thinking about in the restaurant industry, which is we have 1.7 million restaurant workers in California. We estimate between 50 to 75% of small business restaurants are going to close permanently through the pandemic. That's at least 1 million workers that will lose their jobs permanently, for 5 to 10 years. But before they decide to close permanently, could we partner with some of these small businesses to say something like, if you elect to not only go to the high road on the job quality measures and our measures, but also retrofit and go green as a restaurant, that you could bring back people and hire and bring back your people to then be a part of this greening or retrofitting of your restaurant. So it wouldn't just be about like the solar companies being able to apply for this money or companies that are already sort of in that space. It could be industries that are closing like mine that could put themselves forward to retrofit their own businesses that could also be part of the jobs guarantee.
Thank you so much, Saru. Other comments, thoughts?
I'd like to just go ahead.
Go ahead, Betty.
Go ahead, Betty.
You're on mute, Betty.
Thank you. I like this priority area in so many ways. I think it kind of wraps a lot of the other areas into it. And but I do want to just provide some commentary on the public sector role. I do think we have an issue of lack of capacity in the public sector that I don't want to. I like the ambition, but I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of really preparing and building capacity in the public sector. I think the setting of the criteria, the framework, the policies, I think that's all very doable. In terms of our own ability to walk the talk, I think it's really difficult. So I would say we need to have a little bit more focus on that. But two things came to mind when I started looking at this particular priority area and some of the specific actionables. One, Dr. Coley's kind of reminder that the digital divide. I mean, I think that this one just kind of speaks to that as a foundational issue. And then secondly, as I think about the public sector and kind of to Saru's point, how do we think about doing business differently? So as I think about government going forward, I think there's a real kind of geographic equity issue we could address with this as well. So is there a way to actually kind of decentralize government so that we're actually kind of more on the ground and ready to deal with, kind of how to, one, real resiliency in communities, but two, also deal with the shocks that we're going to have to experience. And so I think about it from kind of a response point of view and just how lacking we've been in terms of, just being able to be at the ready to assist communities. So just some thoughts there about the public sector.
Yeah, I echo a lot that's been said about this priority area. Excited and in particular on the public sector and the care jobs, because one thing that I've been thinking about as some of the priorities that have spoken about, job creation is that we have to look at also through an equity lens, because a lot of what's been discussed is like infrastructure, construction, that's historically been kind of male dominated industries. And so I think we really need to think about sectors that have majority women workforce. And so I think the public, I think I was happy to see that care was in the list, but it's like really the only mention of in the kind of more job creation priorities, where there was sort of an acknowledgement of like more of a women dominates, sector and industry. So thinking about maybe this is throughout both looking at gender and racial equity as we think about all the priorities and principles, and making sure that, you know, the metrics and the measurements sort of look at that as well.
Thank you. Dr. Coley?
Yeah, I just wanted to also pick up on something just mentioned about the number of individuals by virtue of small businesses being impacted by the pandemic. They're going to be affected because, and maybe this is going to be addressed in another group, but I really, we've been having some discussions in the Pomona area where there are a number of small businesses, and when you look across the state, private sector has different meanings. There's the large companies, but when you think about across the state, the small and mid-sized companies, in order to build their capacity to do these things, is there some other discussions that are happening? I know we have federally the Small Business Administration, but how do we build capacity in order to also take advantage of these opportunities and support?
Great. Fei.
Hi, sorry, my signal is so bad that I couldn't do video today. Two quick questions related to Roy and James' panel, as well as possibly related to job quality. One comment is about government as an industry is also undergoing a lot of job shifting in terms of the nature of the job, the quality of job, and also the quality of the outcome of the job, especially by the pressure of technology and all that. I think this is an area that lots of deep research started to happening. My colleagues in the law school and governance expertise area at Stanford are doing research, and there is, I really hope California as a state, the most innovative state, can become a front runner in thinking about how we can respond to the nature of job changes in governance and government as a job sector. Another quick comment. I'm happy to send actually readings on that. We have some excellent readings written by law professors at Stanford. Another quick comment is about the shocks that I think Roy and James talk about, especially the shocks introduced by the environment's natural changes as well as diseases. But another kind of shock is the innovation itself, especially look at this share economy and social media. These technologies brought jobs, but also brought shocking changes of jobs, and it's still impacting the future of jobs. And how do we create a deep partnership between government, industry, and civil society to engage these industries who are making, or who intended or unintended, big changes to our job labor market? How do we engage them instead of reacting retroactively or posteriorly, and have more anticipatory and participatory policies? So these are the two aspects.
Thank you so much, Fei. Doug?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the conversation about job shifting, and this was in the back of my mind in the first panel as well, on creating jobs in clean energy. And I just wonder if we need to have some sort of language that addresses the fact that there are a lot of people in quality jobs right now that are going to have to shift out of those jobs and those industries in response to things like climate change, automation. We've talked about this. And particularly the role of worker voice in those, and I think I shared in earlier meetings, very small scale examples. The parking industry in San Francisco, for example, where we have 1,500 members and haven't really lost jobs to automation because workers have been able to shift into new positions by virtue of having a union. So whether we call it just transition, there's a lot of people who are smarter than me that have given a lot of thought to this, but I think we would be well served to have something in our document somewhere that recognizes that people are going to have to move and we need to help them move.
Thank you so much. So here's one thing I would like to do. I actually am going to transition us out of the conversation about the specific areas. And John, I'm going to have you go first in this next section as maybe a bridge to that also, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so again, just thank you so much to our co-leads and to the entire commission. As the co-leads I know will say, these ideas did not come out of just the work over the last few weeks. It came out of the year-long conversations and the feedback and the inputs. And I'm just, again, I know this has been said, but inspired and really proud of the incredible work. Which, when we said at the beginning, we didn't have a clear roadmap for what we were going to do at the end, but we've paved it as we've gone, and it's just been incredible, paving of the high road and of the all of these principles and ideals that we started with. So what we're going to do now, just for the next 20 or so, 25 minutes, is have a conversation about any gaps, right? Recognizing that in these priority areas, as much as we've worked and tried, so many of the co-leads also had this question, like, there's some things that I'm not sure if it fits into my area, but it's something we want to address. That's also come up a little bit here today. So if there's things that we are, that we're missing, that we ought to raise, these may not be, again, we've arrived at the priority areas, and we've now arrived at some really deep thinking and moonshot ideas between now and 2030 for what we want to accomplish, including some metrics for how we get there. So it's not to open up a new area, but it's just to make sure that we've thought through all of the things that again, wanting to arrive at a set of recommendations that everybody can embrace and be really proud of. Are there things that you want to raise that are cross-cutting, things that we want to make sure to have brought up in this space, and things that we might want to, and I've taken notes also on things that people said we just should mention it, even if it's not going to be a specific recommendation that we want to make. This might be things that we said at the beginning are, what we call work adjacent. Again, understanding that, there's so much that's attached to this. We don't want to give short shrift to any of it, but we do want to have a focus. So are there just things like that that we should be aware of? Because again, this is our last chance to have this kind of substantive conversation about what we're going to do. And in the last meeting, it's really just going to be about landing at the results of this whole last year of work. So John, I'm going to start with you on that, and then go to Maria.
Sure, I appreciate that. And let me try to sort of synthesize a couple different pieces that I think are also cross-cutting, and I've wanted to try to find an opportunity to weave in. So forgive me if I don't do this perfectly, but I think the first thing, just picking up on the last discussion regarding a jobs guarantee and in the public sector's role. I think there's been a lot of important points made just now by Feifei and Betty earlier about some of the constraints perhaps and limitations on the role of the public sector. I think, one of the themes that has been consistent throughout this whole process from my perspective is that, a lot of the problems we have been related to the absence of a robust public sector. In the first meeting, we talked about the dominance of shareholder primacy theory and the belief that all social problems could be handled through the market, through solutions that were in the private sector. And I think there's some very clear limits to that philosophy that have gotten us partially the way to the place that we have arrived. And specifically with regard to a jobs guarantee, I think there's going to be a really fundamental role for a public sector, both because there are some huge needs, and climate mitigation is a big area where I think this is true. There's just not an opportunity to find a way to identify profit opportunities for private sector interests in a way that meets the challenge of the huge shared problems and externalities that we face. And I just think there's going to have to be a role for the public sector to step in and identify resources, get those resources. And I really appreciate Mariana and Carla including tax revenue in their presentation. You know, we have 154 billionaires in the state of California. And when I last checked, since the COVID-19 crisis began, their wealth had grown by $175 billion. The resources are here, and we've got to do that. Also, to Fei-Fei's comment, I would love to see those readings, Fei-Fei, that you're talking about. There's a huge problem with the privatization of our public sector in terms of transparency and accountability. We cannot have totally obscure, opaque data entities controlling all of the collective information about our society. It's just not going to work. And then, you know, secondly, I have to go back to Carla and Mariana's point. I think that the proposal regarding portable benefits, I think underneath that proposal, which as regards domestic workers, I'm totally convinced that portable benefits are an appropriate and righteous solution that this commission should support. I think there's a question about beyond domestic workers and other so-called non-traditional workers. What is the real need? And we just need more data and we need more research. And I think one of the goals of this commission ought to be to direct the University of California system to do just that research before we go ahead and make proposals that are not meeting the real needs that are out there. And I think that's true for that proposal and a number of other proposals potentially as well.
Thank you, John.
Julie, if I could just make a quick comment just to build on John's thought here, not to address everything you've raised, John, because I think I like all those points. I think it's within our remit, I think, if we think that as part of the priorities and goals we're setting forward, there is a need to either for more research or more thinking or more gathering of data. I think we probably should, I would encourage us to think about how we want to make sure that that's part of our recommendations and what form that takes and what issues. Because I think these are clearly, many of these are issues that require more work. Some of it will look like research, and I'm glad that Fei-Fei is sending us some ideas, but we have a great California system, but also some of these are things that are going to require experimentation, back to the UBI discussion that we had. So I think there's something that is some ongoing learning-like activities that are going to have to be part of, I think, what we put forward here.
So Julie, I just wanted to make a comment, if that's okay, Maria.
Yeah, wonderful, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, you asked the question, what's missing? And I wanted to lift that comment that Doug made about transitions that will happen. I think it's very important that for a future work commission, that be somewhere in the conversation in our documents, because I do believe that just from a private sector perspective and, you know, the companies that I meet with, that is going to happen. That's the reality, that there is a change that is happening. And a lot of it, you know, has been because of just the new economy that's emerging because of this COVID situation that we're under, in terms of how companies are rethinking their work and how they get things done. So I do think that's important to ensure that we've got it somewhere in here, that transition of work. I think it can also be tied to the universities. I've met with universities as well who talk about lifelong learning because they know this is coming. So they need to be part of that solution as well. So just wanted to make that reference. But, and just to add one other point to what John was mentioning, I do think that it's worth recognizing that from a private sector perspective, we probably have an opportunity right now simply because of everything that's been going on with the pandemic and how it's really shed light to inequities, to figure out where there are opportunities to collaborate. Because I do believe that businesses are taking a fresh look at how they are working with their communities, with their employees, their suppliers, the environment. I think at the beginning of, I think it was at the first meeting where I brought up the corporate purpose and how that was new, and it's a year later from that, and there's a lot of conversation happening at the highest levels within private sector on, is it working and are we living up to that? So I think it's just worth mentioning that we probably have the best opportunity to figure out how do we leverage the private sector during this time. Thank you.
So important. Yeah, go ahead, Mariana.
Yeah.
I see Mariana, Carla, and I see Betty.
Yeah, and it builds off a little bit of Maria's, but also on Feifei's comments in the chat. Like, I think one thing is thinking about, like, how do we make sure to highlight technology and, you know, the impact of technology on these different sectors and industries. And then, you know, in particular, there were many convenings where we actually spoke about technology and data. And I do think that we need to see where we can incorporate some of the recommendations around technology and data in particular, and in terms of the impacting workforce, not only in terms of surveillance, which was sort of mentioned, but also in terms of data itself as an asset. Could think of it as a public utility, in fact, right? So, like, I think in terms of, and how do we make sure that workers are have certain rights, protections, and have some ownership over over data. So just to say, I think the data piece was something that was some parts of a lot of our conversations, and it doesn't quite fit into any of the priorities. So I just think we need to think about how we incorporate it.
Yes, absolutely. Carla, and then Betty.
Yeah, I would just second that. I mean, I feel like we've heard a lot about the digital divide, the impact of technology on jobs. This is a California commission. I mean, I think that's got to be, I think we need a clear, you know, statement about that. We have some expertise here for that. Second, just, I've heard a lot of comments, but I just wanted to maybe just highlight it, that building the capability of small and medium-sized companies to adapt and pivot to the changes that are going to be required for these jobs of the future is something maybe we haven't articulated as much as we could. And I just, you know, that's about capital deployment, advisory services, procurement, and the kind of structure John and Lance were advancing, or other structures, could be an envelope for that, but we haven't really called that out. How do you build the capabilities of businesses to actually achieve these objectives that we're setting out? So I just wanted to mention that. And then more on the framework level, I mean, at least from my point of view, and I don't know how we're going to structure this ultimately, but some of the themes I would want to see captured are an inclusive economy. So that's about training and preparation. Good jobs, we talked about that, are high road jobs. Future jobs, that's a whole other concept Roy and James advanced. And then I would say sort of maybe this combination of ownership and worker voice. We've talked a lot about that. And then the overlay of geography, gender, and race. I just don't want to lose that in each of these categories. So I don't know, ultimately, I'm sure Anmal's got a big head, a growing migraine, but how we're going to integrate this is really challenging. I just wanted to mention those categories because I think they're really important to bring out.
Yeah, very important. Betty?
Great. I want to echo Carla's comments with respect to the equity issues of race, gender, and geography, because I think those are very real. And if we're going to actually really have this orientation about how we create a more, I guess, future-proof and inclusive, kind of landscape, I think those are all considerations. One thing that I still feel a little bit of a maybe discomfort, and it's only because we've not had a lot of devoted time to it, and that is the capacity of our public educational institutions. Obviously, they've been budget constrained, very much, having to do instruction and carry out their mission in very different ways with the pandemic. And so I guess I would add to my comments earlier about the capacity of the public sector, just really that whole body of the educational community, because so much of what we are looking at with respect to upskilling, lifelong learning, bringing in those who have traditionally been excluded from programs, really relies on what our public educational institutions can provide. So to me, that could be just a gap if we're not conscious about their true capacity today.
Lance, did you have your hand up? Governor Granholm, did you? Okay. Doug?
I mentioned this in the chat box, but I publicly want to go on the record supporting Mariana's comments about the need to have something about data. And I don't know where it goes either, but I feel very strongly in support.
Thank you. Feifei, if you're still on, I know I saw you talked about the Digital Economy Lab. I think one of the things that is sort of exciting about this, about where we are now too, is identifying, I guess they're really partners, but rockets to help move us forward that already exist or are projects that are taking place for people on this commission and collaborations of people on this commission. I don't know, Feifei, if you want to say anything about that and whether some of this conversation which we've had around data, who owns data, what is the purpose of data, who gets to say how it gets used, is that something that's also going to be happening there?
Yeah, so yes, I'm on, Julie, and as James said, this is a conversation we've been having offline as well. I think data is definitely related to jobs, job quality, job security, job fairness, equity, inclusion. I think the understanding of data is still in its early phase, even though the usage of data is in certain sectors have gone into a watershed moment. So I think it would be amazing if California can assume a leadership in partnering with private sectors, academia, thought leadership, civil society, public sector, and really have these bold initiatives or potential goals to rethink about the relationship between data of workers, consumers, government, and so on. And related to that, the Digital Economy Lab, part of Stanford and part of Stanford AI Institute, is tasked to look at future of work, digital economy, and all these related issues. We would be very happy to be part of a growing number of partners in engaging with our state, local, federal governments, as well as industry on that. I think I cannot agree more with everybody here on this commission, and also inspired by the conversations with James, Julie, that this is a central piece of the transformation of jobs. And I would hope that California takes a leadership role in that.
Thank you, Feifei. So just one thing, I'll just build out on that, right? Being very cognizant of where we are in the life of this commission's work and the charge to come out with these recommendations. Again, really grateful for the thoughtful work that's gone on and all the conversation that we'll go back and take and integrate and think about. But is some of these pieces there, this commission isn't going to be and doesn't have to be the answer to everything. So to the extent that there are other ongoing streams of work that overlap with some of what we're talking about, right? And Lande just mentioned this, and I wanted to mention too, right? There is tremendous amount of work going on with Lande as the governor's senior advisor on higher education around addressing some of these educational equity issues. Feifei, thank you for what you said, right? I think that the data, that question which came up at the very beginning, but as Feifei said, like, I know we all trust Feifei in terms of, the leader in this field, to say that there's still a lot of questions, even about what we're talking about when we talk about it. I think that's not something that we're going to solve here as the Future of Work Commission, but it's something we want to acknowledge. And I think acknowledge the other streams of work, including work that has been initiated by and is, ongoing with this administration, right, around certain things. So I think I say that partly as an idea to see what you all think, and partly maybe to give us all a little bit of relief from feeling the need to address everything that's related to work and the future of work and the like. That was not the charge from the beginning. I think we've been, there's bold, big ideas that are at the core of what we're talking about. And again, it's not to value the rest of it, but it is to find a realistic stream for how some of this work will proceed and identify the right places, partners, and other areas where this is happening, right? This is not the only place where this work is going on. I know everybody knows that, but I think it makes sense for us to identify some of where those are as a way to acknowledge, that you all think and we think that these are important, valuable, and related to the future of work. Okay, other comments, anything else? These can also be about specific things that came up in the earlier part of the conversation, because I think what I don't want to do is for people to feel, again, I know I said this before, we do all this work, at the end it always feels like there isn't enough time for everything that everybody wants. So, and then I'm gonna turn it over to James and Mary Kay also for any comments about this as we wrap up the substantive kind of, conversations. But is there anything else that anybody wants to say, add, critique, make sure we include? I also just want to note, remember earlier we had, as part of the interim update for this commission, we had put out kind of what we would call the problem statement, right? The statement of challenges and opportunities. That is still part of this work. So a lot of what has been said here about, the importance of equity, the importance of looking at everything through a geography, gender, and race perspective, that has been part of, the entire spirit of what you all bring to this work and the conversations, and frankly, in the priorities and the recommendations. But that's all also part of what was in that document and will be included in what is produced. So just to remind us all, right, we're not trying to create something totally out of whole cloth here now in October of 2020. We're building on all the work that's already been done, and some of that you've seen it, and it will be integrated too. And James, I see you. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that, and then Mary Kay can help us wrap this discussion. Just to build on that, Julie, I just wanted to remind commissioners that if you just have a picture in your minds about what I think we're collectively aiming for our, I'll call it the report, but for the output from this, I think it may be worth thinking about it in sort of two parts or two sections. In the first part, we are going to update the interim report, in the sense that in that interim report, as Julie described, we did have a range of problems that we had identified that were impacting workers and work in California. We are going to update that, partly because, as we all discussed in, I think, one of our previous recent meetings, that we've learned a few more things during COVID that were not being captured in that initial set of problems. So we want to make sure we update this commission's view of the challenges that are impacting work and workers in California. And also some of the actions that we had. If you remember in the interim report in April, I think we had about a dozen actions that we thought were important to do. Now we know that some of those actions have ended up in the task force, others have not, others have taken different paths. So we're going to update, think of the first aspect of our report as being an update of what we had in April with everything else that we've learned. So that's kind of one piece. So we're not going to lose any of that work in that thinking. Then we're going to have a second part. And in that second part is much of what we've talked about in this conversation today, which is with this big wrapper around a social compact for California, is the big wrapper for what I'm calling the second part. And within that social compact, if you recall in the material that Mary Kay and I circulated, there were kind of three pieces within that. So think of them as 2A, 2B, and 2C. Let me just remind you what they are in the social compact. 2A were a set of principles that we thought as a commission were very important. I think there were principles like, inclusion and diversity and equity, principles like some of the ones that Carla was describing, making sure that it involves everybody. This isn't just about the state, but it's about employers, it's about workers, it's about other stakeholders, all of that. Principles about these notions of quality, etc. So there was a set of principles that we had started to draft together based on what we've learned. Think of that as 2A. Then 2B are going to be these big priorities. These are the 5 areas that we've been discussing so far, where we're going to try and articulate, as you all have been doing through this terrific work, some moonshot goals around those 5 priority areas. Some of the markers for success, as some of you have started to frame, for how we know we've achieved those things, what some of the interim milestones might be, and what some of the actions might be, or where we might start, recognizing that those actions are not going to be comprehensive. So think of that as kind of the section 2, with some principles, some priorities, some metrics, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be the second piece of what we're going to have in our report. Now, you've all clearly raised some things that are missing in all of that. So we're going to need to make sure we reflect that based on this conversation, that it all goes in there. So the draft that you're going to see will involve these 2 aspects. I just wanted to frame that and remind us all collectively, so you kind of have a rough sense where things are going to go. Now, in that section 2, just to make a couple more comments, we're going to need obviously to be very thoughtful, and it's going to take some amazing work by Anmol and others, and Monique and Brittany and others, to figure out how we do this, to how we make sure it all sings together and is somewhat integrated. So we're going to beg your indulgence on how that comes together. But that's the goal, is going to be to attempt to do that. And, Mary Kay, Julie, and I and others in Landia are going to try and help with that. Now, obviously, we'll get your feedback when this comes together. But I wanted just to remind that these are the 2 parts of what our report will have for sure. Now, obviously, we'll have other things, wrappers around that as well. But these are the 2 big parts. Is that helpful? Just to remind everybody where all the pieces are going to go.
Thank you, James. Yes, and just to dig in on that even a little bit more, right? So there's lots of pieces to what has been discussed that are important to the vision, important to how we carry these things through. Not all of it is necessarily going to be in a final report, given that, as James has said, right, we're trying to make something that also has consistency across the various areas, and is at the right level of detail to signal what this social compact should be, what we want it to be, how we might get there, but not be overly prescriptive about what that looks like, recognizing that, if we can inspire action in pursuit of the social compact in other ways, we'd want to do that as well. So just, to make that point, lots of things that have come up here. I'm excited that both in conjunction with many of you and just in our own work, some of this is work that we are doing, right? Like, how do we drive existing funds for workforce development so that they're subsidizing the high road and not the low road, right? How do we look at existing money that is meant for training and apprenticeships and use them in a way that's more impactful? These are things that I'm committed to, this administration's committed to. Some of that is happening, right? Strategic enforcement, working with organizations on the ground who have the trust of workers to be smart about how we enforce. That is something that we are doing. It's something we need to do at greater scale. I love that this commission has identified that as a priority area, but there are some things that are, so just examples of things that are happening. Again, similar to my earlier comment about other streams of work, right? There are lots of initiatives in this administration. The Future of Work Commission is a key and important one of them, but some of what we're talking about may fit better somewhere else. And so we want to acknowledge that other work and make sure that we, that there's a practical way to talk about all of these different areas without having everything be about everything. And so there's lots of pieces to that, but I'll stop at there and just, again, keep looking for, any comments that others have, and then also turn it over to Mary Kay.
I just want to pause for any comments that Julie just invited. I don't see any. Is that right, Julie? Do you see any?
I don't see any either.
So let me just conclude, I think, this section before we go to public comment. I don't know, I think James and Julie must share this psychically with me. One of the things that I've been taking note of in this commission meeting is that the co-chair role is now been kind of co-owned by each commissioner and the co-leads that presented. And it's been, for me, a joy to kind of witness the best of all of us coming out to put a stamp on the report. And when Carla and Mariana talked about the rocket to the moon, it made me think that we were creating a galaxy together because of the multiple moonshots. And that many of you said just before the pandemic swept us all, hey, we need to be more ambitious and clear and paint a vivid picture. Like many of you were calling on that as we were trying to get to the interim report. And I hope you share our satisfaction that a much more vivid picture of the California we have the right to expect is emerging through the moonshots that you've created. And I just really appreciated James's summary of how we're going to take our collective work and feed it back to you before it moves on to the governor. And many of you have mentioned governor team staff, but I just wanted to acknowledge that Anmol, Anish, Abby, Georgia from the Institute of the Future, Monique and Brittany from Mackenzie, Peter and Kristen from SEIU are a collaborative team that have been listening to try and capture the essence of this, and that will magically produce. Yeah, I agree, Carla. You made me think of it when you talked about God love Amal, but I wanted you to know that there's many more with him that bring this to life. And so I just really want to thank that. And Londe and Julie have been an incredible partnership with James and I to kind of make this commission. I don't know if this has been true for others of you. Other commissions that I've been on have been much more anemic about the participation of each commissioner. And I just want to thank Londe and Julie for allowing James and I to encourage unleashing all the creativity of the commission. So I really look forward to the next step that we're going to take together and what we can launch together in this state.
Thank you,
Back to you.
for that. Well, I'll just say one last thing before we go to public comment too, which is to pick up on Lance's statement about the matchmaking of him and John. So as just a little story about my daughter who is in college, I think people are bored and the privileged kids who are in school are trying to figure out what to do to continue to stay connected. So she started this thing at her college about connecting, like this whole algorithm about how to find your perfect match. So I'm going to tell her that today, Mama was complimented with being a very good matchmaker on a much different level. And I might say as important as the personal matches that we make in our lives, in our personal lives, the matches we make at work to try to fulfill the visions that we have for how we be impactful, how we do meaningful work, how we make the world better, especially at a time where it is just so desperately needed at every level. I would say the individual matchmaking of our phenomenal co-leads, but also the matchmaking. This takes me back to the pre-announcement of the commission days for us. I'm going to look to Londe here, who I know is smiling because trying to figure out who the commission ought to be side by side with the governor. I would just say that that is one of the most but the greatest sources of pride I have in the time that I've been able to be labor secretary, and to see all of you here in this new space, right, this Zoom space, and to feel connected and like we've been working together. It's really a credit to all of you, the investment that you made on top of everything else that you had to do, the adjustments that you made on top of the additional things we all had to do because of the crises that we've been hit with. It's just been extraordinary. So this is not our last meeting, but it seemed like the right time because we talked about matchmaking to say that this match of commissioners has been absolutely worthy of California, which is what we said at the beginning. We wanted a group that was worthy of California, worthy of our position in the world, and now worthy of the challenges that we face. And it's been just personally and professionally absolutely incredible for me. So thank you all for that, and incredible work. So Landi, I'm going to turn it over to you for any comments you have and for public comment.
Sure. Well, thank you. I would certainly echo all of those comments, and so as not to bore you, only add to one is, I can't describe how enormously gratifying it was to listen to this meeting and hear all of these ideas, knowing that of the spark that we started with, I think back in, I don't know, March of 2019. So that is just incredibly gratifying. And then when I think back to March of 2019, I also think to our friend Lenny, and I don't want to leave him out as we think through what really inspired in many, many ways this collection, this terrific collection of individuals and of ideas and of engagement. And so I don't know, he's probably not watching because he should not be, but I just want to put a public shout out to him and to say thank you to him for his contributions and his guidance and his leadership, which I think have been just extraordinary in helping us to get to this point. And I'm just so excited about what we're going to be able to craft together and take back to the governor, and more importantly, what we'll be able to implement together. So it certainly exceeds all expectations. With that, I will certainly move into public comment. We've had only 2 public comments, one that was really posed as a question, and I just wanted to say for all of the attendees, we actually don't use this space to answer questions, but the commissioners are certainly very, very happy to hear comments. And so with that, I know Sunita Parbu had sent a comment earlier this morning, or a question. And so I'm wondering if we could go to Sunita and see if Sunita is interested in making a comment first, since that was the first correspondence I received this morning.
Yes. Hello, everyone. This has been a fantastic session to listen to, and I only discovered that it was available via Zoom soon after your last one, which I had missed by a day or two. So I'm really grateful that this has been available to listen to. I had a question around, sorry, that's my phone dinging. I had a question around raising the levels of skills and whether we've done analysis in California about small changes in skills that lead to big changes in hiring and income. This ties to the idea that most people don't have a lot of time or money to invest in changing their own skills, but if there's a high enough reward, that it's possible. And I'd seen some research from companies like Burning Glass in the private sector in other states, and I'm wondering if we've done studies like that for California.
Thank you for that. As I mentioned, the commissioners, when they're taking public comment, they don't answer questions, but I could certainly direct you to our colleagues at Institute for the Future who can help answer some of the data questions that you have. And I would say that we had a lot of discussion at our very first convening about the role of skills as we think about the future of work. So I would also direct you to the notes from that initial meeting and the minutes from that meeting, which I think start to get at some of those questions. There's a lot out there in terms of the skills debate and where skills fit in, and I think some recognition as well that skills by themselves does not solve the problems related to poverty and inequity that we are trying to make sure that we solve for through the commission. So I would say that. Our next public comment comes from Sasha Feldstein.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for all the great work that you're doing. I've really enjoyed listening to these conversations. Again, my name is Sasha Feldstein, and I'm from the California Immigrant Policy Center. You've heard from us and our partners several times throughout this process. However, during this call, I didn't hear recommendations that specifically talked about the needs and disparities facing immigrant workers, particularly those without work authorization who represent 1 in 10 workers in California. So I want to urge the Commission to consider including recommendations that directly address the urgent and critical needs of immigrant workers in California as they relate to generations of exclusion and exploitation, as well as how our immigrant communities are currently being deeply, deeply impacted by our changing economy. Undocumented immigrants drive our economy and create enormous wealth for our state. And so we really want to see them fully included in our health and safety protections. As Maria Elena explained with SB 1257, that was a major blow. But also being included in our job and infrastructure investments, in an ability to work in quality jobs in our safety net and in decision-making spaces concerning the future of their work. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That is all that we have in terms of public comment. So I think with that, I will turn it back to Julie, or maybe it's James and Mary Kay who wants to ring us out.
I'll defer to the secretary. The only comment I'll make is, again, thank you to all the commissioners and the time and effort you spend in all of this. I couldn't echo any more what Mary Kay just described. We're just so grateful to work with this amazing group of commissioners. But I'll hand over to our leader here, Secretary Sue.
No, well, thank you all. I mean, I guess maybe it's appropriate to end with an acknowledgement of you, James, and Mary Kay. I know the generous spirit in which you lead had you saying that, you know, this has all been co-led, and I do think that's entirely true, and everybody stepped up, and that's the spirit of groups that I like to be a part of, and you know, a lot of that was driven by how you both lead in your own spaces and in this one. So thank you both for the role that you've played. And now not only have we had 2 sessions of deep discussion around really hard things to try to land at a set of recommendations for the governor, but we are also ending this meeting ahead of time. So again, extraordinary on every front for everybody. Thank you so much. I hope everyone takes the 20 minutes you got back to engage in a little bit of self-care, which we all need so much in this moment, and not jump right into your next thing. But thank you all for everything. And we will see you on November 9th.
Yes, and our work is not done just yet.
Our work is not done. And to echo Governor Granholm, right, the next marriage making is between aspiration and action, and we are all very committed to that. And you know, here on the governor's team, we know that you know, our work does not end with the formal meetings ending here, but we're also grateful for the ongoing work that we're going to be able to do with each of you in various areas. So thank you.
I have to say, Julie, governors have a way of keeping things on track and keeping us on track, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.